My sister moved next door and took over my life. When my sister Vanessa moved into the house next to mine, I tried to see the positives. She was my only sibling, and having her close could mean sharing more of life's moments. But I was also cautious. Vanessa had always been headstrong, and we had very different personalities. She was the kind of person who'd take what she wanted, assuming everyone around her would adjust. Her boys, Jace and Leo, were 6 and 8, little bundles of boundless energy and mischief. They had a reputation for pushing limits, something Vanessa seemed proud of. She'd often say things like, "My boys are just spirited," while ignoring the chaos they left behind. Still, I wanted to be a good aunt. I'd planned on helping her get settled and spending time with the kids. It started with small favors. Vanessa would pop over, asking if I could watch the boys, just for a minute, so she could get things done. The minute would turn into hours, and more often than not, she'd stay out longer than she promised. Before long, her emergencies became a regular occurrence, and my home became a second playground for Jace and Leo. The first few weeks were manageable, though stressful. I worked from home as a freelance writer, and while my schedule was flexible, I still had deadlines and clients to consider. The boys didn't make that easy. They'd barrel through my apartment, pulling books off the shelves, throwing cushions around, and once even knocked over a cup of coffee dangerously close to my laptop. I tried to laugh it off, thinking they'd settle down once they got used to me. But every time they came over, their antics grew more outrageous. One day, as I was rushing to finish a project, Vanessa showed up at my door, frazzled and in a hurry. "Please, can you watch Jason Leo? I have a meeting I can't miss, and the babysitter canceled." I looked at her, speechless. It was the third time that week. I tried to explain my deadlines, but she dismissed my concerns with a wave, saying, "You're just at home anyway. You have no idea how hard it is juggling work and kids." And with that, she was gone. The boys were restless that day, bouncing from room to room, turning my place upside down. I finally sat them down in front of a movie, hoping it would buy me enough time to work. But just as I settled into a groove, I heard a crash. I rushed to the living room to find that they'd broken my favorite vase, a gift from my late grandmother. It was shattered into a dozen pieces, irreparable. When Vanessa returned that evening, I tried to tell her about the vase, hoping she'd show some remorse, or at least help clean up. But she just shrugged, saying, "It's just a vase. I'll get you a new one." I was floored. That vase had sentimental value, but to her, it was just an object. I decided to have a serious talk with Vanessa about boundaries. I explained that while I loved the boys, I couldn't keep sacrificing my time and my work for her constant requests. At first, she looked at me as if I'd slapped her. "Are you saying you don't want to help your own nephews?" she asked, her voice thick with accusation. "Vanessa, I'm happy to help, but it's just too much. I have my own life too," I replied gently but firmly. She left in a huff, and for a few days there was an icy silence between us. I thought maybe she'd understood, and we'd finally come to a compromise. But soon enough, the demands began again. She'd say things like, "I just need a break, and I know I can trust you more than a stranger," or, "Come on, sis, you're family. Isn't that what family's for?" Reluctantly, I'd cave in, feeling guilty each time, but her quick breaks became hours-long outings, and her promises to return on time were rarely kept. I became her default babysitter, and my patience wore thin. Then came the day of the self-care retreat. Vanessa called me one Saturday morning, saying she and some friends had booked a spa day out of town and she desperately needed me to watch the boys. It was supposed to be just for the day, but as night fell, there was no sign of her. I texted her, asking when she'd be back, but got only a vague reply. "Running late. Don't wait up." Exhausted, I put the boys to bed, then sat alone, stewing in frustration. When she finally showed up the next morning, she looked refreshed and completely oblivious to the stress she'd put me through. "The retreat was amazing," she gushed. "I feel like a new person." I didn't have the heart to argue in front of the boys, but once they went home, I texted Vanessa, telling her we needed to talk. She showed up that evening, and I laid everything on the table: the missed deadlines, the broken belongings, the sleepless nights. I told her that while I loved her and the kids, I couldn't keep this up. For the first time, she seemed to really listen. She apologized, and for a moment, I thought things would finally change. But then she added, I just don't understand why it's such a big deal. You work from home, so I thought it wouldn't be a burden. I mean, don't you want to be close to family? That hurt. I wanted to be close, but not at the expense of my own peace and responsibilities. I told her I needed her to respect my boundaries, or I'd have to stop helping entirely. Vanessa seemed to take it personally. She stormed off, saying I was selfish and only cared about myself. Days passed and she barely spoke to me. I felt sad, but also relieved. Maybe she'd finally understand that I needed my own life. Weeks went by, and Vanessa's requests finally dwindled, but she still held a grudge. Family gatherings became tense, with her casting me cold glances and making passive-aggressive comments. It hurt, but I knew I'd made the right decision. Over time, Vanessa adjusted, finding other arrangements for the boys. Our relationship healed slowly, and she began to see things from my perspective. She even apologized, admitting that she'd taken advantage of me and had been insensitive to my needs. Looking back, I don't regret setting boundaries. It taught me that loving family doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being. Family can still be close and supportive without stepping over each other's limits. And while things between us are not as easy as before, we found a way to respect each other's lives, something we both needed all along. When Vanessa moves next door, her sister initially welcomes the idea of having family close by. But soon, the endless requests to babysit Vanessa's unruly sons turn her life upside down. From broken belongings to missed deadlines, she finds herself struggling to balance family obligations with her own life. As the demands grow and tensions rise, she must make a difficult choice: set firm boundaries and risk hurting their relationship, or continue sacrificing her peace. A story about family, boundaries, and the strength it takes to stand up for oneself.